Did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green? And was the holy Lamb of God? Boker Tov, Talmudim, Chavarim, welcome once again to a presentation of Soulful Psalms. Now, I hope you watched, perhaps with being mesmerized, perhaps puzzled, the performance of the Christian hymn Jerusalem that preceded this. I selected that specifically because it refers to Jerusalem, and the psalm that we're going to be talking about, Psalm 122, is a psalm about Jerusalem. And so it's important to understand what's going on in the psalm because it's going to help us what's going on in the hymn because it helps us understand what's happening for Jews when it comes to Jerusalem. So, just to make the point, I am an Anglophilic son of an Anglo-Saxon mother. So Jerusalem was part of my upbringing, that is the hymn, for a very long time. It's a beautiful hymn. It's lovely. Okay, yeah, it's talking about Jesus, but I wasn't Jewish when I first learned it. But in any case, it's saying a very important thing that I think is illustrative of the Christian attitude toward Jerusalem. If you're paying attention to the very last verse, William Blake, the author, says, "We're going to build Jerusalem on England's green and pleasant hills." So, how is that possible? That sounds ridiculous. And what it is a reflection of kind of the doctrinal attitude of Christians towards Jerusalem. And that doctrine says that Jerusalem is a spiritual entity. And it is not that dusty, rocky city sitting in the Judean hills in Eastern Mediterranean. Maybe it once was, but that Jerusalem is now irrelevant. The Jerusalem that we care about is the city of God, the realization of Christianity in the lives of everybody, the Jerusalem on high. So you can make Jerusalem anywhere, from the southern estuaries of the Thames to within your heart. And that's a lovely idea. And actually, that same idea does appear in Judaism. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But in any case, so understand that the formal position of Christianity is Jerusalem, physical Jerusalem, doesn't matter. And in fact, at one point, one of our founding fathers of the state of Israel, Theodore Herzl, went to the Pope, I believe it was Pius X, and said, "We'd like you to help sponsor us to restore Jerusalem and the land of Israel so that Jews can return there." And he effectively said, Jerusalem isn't important. We put no value on Jerusalem. He didn't say, we put no value on you as Jews. But in any case, his point was that the official position of the church was that physical Jerusalem is no longer important. Now, he was sort of talking out of one side of his mouth when he said that, because by the time Herzl got to him, Jerusalem was already being transformed. The physical Jerusalem was being transformed by Western Christian churches. See, what happens is apparently, even though the city of Jerusalem no longer matters formally, it is the place where Jesus walked at one point. If he didn't trod upon the satanic mills of England, he definitely trod on the Mount Zion. And so, sentimentally, informally, the churches throughout the Christian world knew that Jerusalem was important. And as a result, starting, I don't know, the 1860s, 1870s, um, Western governments got what were called capitulations, that is, special rights within the Ottoman Empire. And almost always what they requested was the right to build Christian institutions in Jerusalem. Talk about priorities. So that's why you can go to Jerusalem to this day and you can visit and you can see not only the Church of the Holy Sepulchre that was built in Byzantine times when the early church controlled the city, but starting in the 19th century on, we get hospices, seminaries, churches, biblical institutes, all kinds of Christian institutions, usually attached to Western countries, are dotted throughout Jerusalem. If you go a little bit north of the or northwest of the walled city, you encounter what's called the Russian Quarter. And the Russian government built a special area for the Russian Orthodox Church to be represented in Jerusalem. That's in competition with the Greek Orthodox Church that has already built several monasteries around Jerusalem. But it keeps going. So we end up with things like Notre Dame, which was a hospice built right outside the walls in the north of the city, which is a French Catholic institution. And then we have some things from the British. We have the Scottish hospice, we have the Swedish hospice, and it just goes on and on. And so, if the physical city didn't matter, why are they putting so much effort into establishing a foothold in the physical city? It's because as much as Christianity likes to allegorize, metaphorize, spiritualize the idea of Jerusalem so that somehow they can diminish all of the reference to it in Old Testament, the fact of the matter is that they can't give it up. I can't quit you, Jerusalem. And so we have a strong Christian representation in the physical city, despite their theology. Now, as for Islam, that's even more complicated because if you read the Quran, you discover there is no mention of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is never brought up. If you read it as a historian like I do, that's because Muhammad really never got outside of the Arabian Peninsula. Maybe he got as far as the far eastern part of Syria, but it wasn't relevant to him. And so he didn't talk about it. And now, if you are someone who really believes that the Quran comes directly from Allah, from God, they do find a hook to connect to Jerusalem. That is a story that is told about how, in a single night, flying on his miraculous Pegasus horse Barak, that Muhammad was able to travel from Mecca to the furthest place. Okay, the furthest place, right? So apparently, we're supposed to understand that the furthest place is in fact Jerusalem. Now, that suggests that Allah has no awareness whatsoever of the Western Hemisphere, that Allah isn't aware that there is a North American continent or a South American continent. So the term furthest place is pretty provincial. But in any case, in the Hadith, which is the Islamic equivalent of the Midrashim, this is elaborated quite a bit. And in the end, the story is told that riding on his miraculous horse, Barak, his flaming Pegasus, that Muhammad reaches Jerusalem. He lands upon the foundation stone. The foundation stone is a tradition that comes from Judaism, that this is the place where the earth was born. All right, going to a sub-midrash, all right? In medieval Jewish midrashim, we hear the story that when God decided to create the world, what he did was he took a chunk off of his throne of glory and he threw it into the chaos, the abyss that was the pre-cosmic world. And that chunk of sapphire, divine power, plopped in there, and then it coagulated stuff, right? And the earth started to form outward from that. And before you knew it, we had a planet. But that means that the rock, where the rock landed, or the chunk of the throne landed, is literally the axis mundi, the navel of the world. Just like a human being and a fetus grows out from the navel, so the earth grew out from that one location. And that foundation stone is in Jerusalem, making Jerusalem the center of the world. And the Islamic tradition adopted that. Mohammed and Barak land on that rock, and then from there, their revelations continue because they are then flying up through the seven heavens. It's a, it's a mystical tradition, very much rooted in Jewish tradition, but that then establishes the connection between Islam and Jerusalem. Now, that seems rather secondary to us. It feels like a series of interpretive moves, and without question it is, but that doesn't diminish the fact that Muslims now consider Jerusalem to be the third most holy city in all the world, all right? And I'm sure that that tradition of Jerusalem being the site of Muhammad's night flight flows directly from the moment when Islamic armies captured Jerusalem. Suddenly it became relevant again. All right. So anyway, be that what as it is, the idea of the importance of Jerusalem is manifest physically by the Dome of the Rock, which is a shrine over the foundation stone. And it's not a mosque, it's a shrine. And then a few yards off to the side, there is the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And Al-Aqsa means the furthest place. So see, it all ties together narratively, architecturally, and spiritually for Muslims. So it's an important city. So now you know how Christians think about Jerusalem. Now you know how Muslims think about Jerusalem. How about us? Well, Jerusalem pops up all over the Hebrew Bible. And it's obviously a physical place. David captures it. It becomes the capital of the new Israelite kingdom and remains important. A temple is built there by Solomon, and it functions sort of like the combination of, if you took the Vatican and Washington, D.C., and slapped them all together, that's Jerusalem. And so we have that, but we also have the development of a more spiritual idea of Jerusalem. And this comes from the idea that everything between heaven and earth exists in correspondence. What does that mean? It means that if there is a Jerusalem below, made out of rocks and wood and people and latrines and all the things that go into a real city, there is a corresponding spiritual mirror of it in the heavens, in the celestial realms. Yerushalayim shel Mala, Jerusalem on high. And obviously, this is where the Christians get their idea of it. And Jerusalem also becomes a kind of allegory for the development of the person. So I want while in exile, we talked about having Jerusalem in our hearts, and that quickly extended to the idea of building Jerusalem or building the temple within ourselves, that our efforts at self-development, at self-improvement, can be described as building Jerusalem, building the temple, as a microcosm within ourselves. And again, you can see how that became part of the Christian tradition. In fact, you can read Jerusalem on 4 levels. Now, the four levels are four levels of interpretation that Judaism has offered for reading any scriptural verse. And the lowest, the first of these, is called Peshat, which means the ordinary meaning. That means Jerusalem on the eastern side of the Mediterranean, the rocks, the wood, the lavatories, the all the things, the untidiness, the family disputes, all of that. That's Peshat. And then there is Remez. Remez means a hint and is usually understood to refer to allegory. All right, that is that Jerusalem can serve as an allegory for something else. And that's the Jerusalem we build in ourselves, right? That's the Jerusalem of self-improvement, of spiritual maturity, and things like that. And then we have drash. Now, drash comes from the same word as midrash. It means a homily. And so you can use Jerusalem to tell a story. You can use Jerusalem to illustrate a point that may be psychological, it may be spiritual, it may be sociological, it may be messianic. And so Jerusalem can bear all of these meanings. And then there is the mystical, sod. And so the mystical is Jerusalem on high, right? The Jerusalem, the celestial Jerusalem. So we got four levels of Jerusalem going on simultaneously in Jewish tradition. And we can utilize any of them. They are all legitimate ways of understanding the word Jerusalem, with this proviso. It is always taught that the meaning of a verse or a word in Hebrew never departs from the Peshat. That means that ordinary Jerusalem always matters. The Jerusalem you commute to, the Jerusalem you work in, the Jerusalem you sleep in on a daily basis, or if you don't live there, the Jerusalem where other people commute and work and sleep. Always, the Bible is talking about that. Now, the clever thing is that if you take the first letters of each of those four forms of interpretation, you get the word Pardes. It's an acronym. We love our acronyms. And Pardes means paradise. So if you want to experience paradise, you study the Bible in all of its levels. But the Peshat never leaves. And as a result, Jews have always cared about Jerusalem. It's always been relevant to us. We never give it up. We take it seriously. You know, I'll tell you a weird story. Someday I will get to Psalm 122, but let me tell you this. So, when the first Zionist Congress met, they got a concession from the British. The British said we would be willing to support a Jewish colony or a Jewish homeland in Uganda. And so that was known as the Uganda proposal. And Theodore Herzl, being a very, very secular Jew, what he was really interested in was a state or a homeland for the Jews, not so much a Jewish homeland. Even though we translate his little pamphlet as the Jewish state, it's really the state of the Jews. So he was more than open to taking the British offer and going to Uganda. But when it was presented to the Zionist Congress, the answer was no. The only place we can go is back to the Jerusalem that exists in the Eastern Mediterranean. It doesn't matter that Uganda is an incredibly verdant, beautiful land that is open to farming and ranching, and you can do all the best things there, and there's fantastic mining. We want the pile of rocks. We want the city that doesn't produce anything. We want the land that is difficult to live on, because it never departs from the Peshat. If we are told that we should not forget Jerusalem, we should keep it in our heart, it's got to be over there, that Jerusalem, not some Jerusalem on England's green and pleasant lands, not Uganda, none of that. So, anyway, I explained all of that on the Saturday morning when it's my great moment to speak as a guest, and I explained why it is Jerusalem is so critically important to Jews. It's important to other religions, and we don't want to deny them access to that. We never have. But it's not that any other religion has had Jerusalem as its capital, but Judaism and the Jewish people have. And so we insist on priority based on that. It's the Peshat. All right. Now that brings us to Psalm 122. All right. So we're going to go find it here. It's coming up. I marked all these pages. That's 148. We'll do that later. Okay. Here we go. 119. 122. It is a short poem. If I said that 119 was incredibly long, which it is, I'm working my way through it. There we go. 122. Now, this poem is, in fact, called a song of ascents, Shir Hamalot, a song of going up the steps, is the most literal translation of it. And it is one of 15 psalms that were clearly intended to be sung during pilgrimages to the temple. Again, very, very real context. And it's a self-referential psalm. It's a psalm going to Jerusalem about Jerusalem. And so let me read it to you, and we'll dissect some of the rhetoric, some of the poetics, and we'll feel it. But key to all of this, as I said very early on, this is kind of a proto-Zionist psalm. It's not long. A song of ascents of David. The David part is boilerplate at this point. I rejoiced when they said to me, we are going to the house of the Lord. That's verse 1. And it begins in a highly personal level. I rejoiced when they said to me, we are going to the house of the Lord. Who's they? We? Well, it's all the Jewish pilgrims and actually probably the non-Jewish hangers-on, people attracted to Judaism, who are all going with one of the three pilgrimage festivals, Pesach, Sukkot, or Shavuot. Hey, we're going to Jerusalem to worship at the temple. Would you like to come with us? I rejoice and very excited. So again, a very, very real context. Our foot stood inside your gates, O Jerusalem. Jerusalem built up, a city knit together, to which the tribes would make pilgrimage, the tribes of the Lord. All right, let's stop and let's talk about our feet. Our feet is a metonym, right? Our feet means us, in the same way that all hands on deck means a ship's crew. The hand, the foot, is just a part of a larger whole that we're supposed to understand. All right, so our feet stood inside your gates. Now, this is the personification of the city. It's not the gates. The psalmist is literally talking to the city, right? I'm trying to think of a song that does this. I know the Red Hot Chili Peppers have a song about LA. And even though it talks about LA in the third person, it is clearly speaking to LA as if it were personified. You know all my secrets, right? So LA gets a second person treatment, and the same thing's happening in Jerusalem. Our feet stood inside your gates of Jerusalem, and then it goes on to describe the physical Jerusalem, right? Jerusalem built up, a city knit together. Now, that phrase is very odd in Hebrew. We're not sure what it's supposed to mean. A lot of people have used it to argue for a whole Jerusalem in the modern context, West Jerusalem, East Jerusalem knit together, et cetera, et cetera. We do not know what it meant in its original context, but I suppose it means something like a city in harmony, or a city with one great purpose or something like that, to which tribes would make pilgrimage, referring to what we're doing right now, the tribes of the Lord, a parallelism, as was enjoined upon Israel to praise the name of the Lord. So we're here in Jerusalem for an express purpose, which is to worship at the temple. There the thrones of judgment stood, the thrones of the house of David. Now that may be the moment we get the idea of divine correspondent. The throne of judgment may be the throne of glory. Kisei kavod, the throne of glory, also the throne of judgment, but there is also the throne of David. Now, it could be, in its original context, that this was complete parallelism, that David, being the chief judge of Israel, his throne would be where you'd get judgment, and it is where he would sit as king. So maybe originally it was meant to refer to this one throne, but now we think of it as referring to two thrones, David's throne and God's throne. Get it? Okay. May those who love you, pray for the well-being of Jerusalem. This is a bumper sticker that I'm sure you've seen. Christians put it on their cars all the time. I don't see any reason why Jews shouldn't also pray for the peace or well-being of Jerusalem. The word is shalom, and it's a sentiment that never gets old, given the conflicts that go on. May those who love you be at peace. All right, so a love for Jerusalem is an intrinsic part of being Jewish. And again, you can think of Jerusalem as a thing on high. You can think of it as a thing inside yourself. You can think of it as a goal that you want to achieve or the Jewish community wants to achieve. But the end is that those who love Jerusalem will also have some love for the physical city. May there be well-being within your ramparts, peace in your citadels, for the sake of my kin and friends. Now, that is an interesting phrase. I would split it in two, the way the rabbis like to do. Kin refers to Jews, friends refers to non-Jews. Now, that again, that may not have been the original intention in the Hebrew, but in fact, it works beautifully. And we live interactively in a permeable world where we have non-Jewish friends, we have non-Jewish relatives, we marry non-Jews, and non-Jews marry us. So the idea that we pray for the well-being not only of our ostensibly Jewish kin, but also for what I like to say Jewish adjacent friends and family, it seems totally appropriate and makes this relevant even to this day. I pray for your well-being for the sake of the house of the Lord our God. That zeroes us back in on the temple in the middle of Jerusalem. And then it concludes with, I seek your good. Now, the envelope structure here, again, in the rhetoric of the psalm, I rejoiced is the way it begins. I seek your good is the way it ends. So the end message is we are entitled to take Jerusalem personally. It's whatever it is as a communal institution, whatever it is as the capital of the state of Israel, whatever it is as the residence of the temple of God, it matters to me. And it should matter to me. And I'm entitled to have feelings for Jerusalem that are very personal. So, as I like to say, take Jerusalem personally. So, this psalm is perhaps one of the greatest of the Zionist psalms, or proto-Zionist. There was no Zionism way back when. It's not the only one. We're going to meet another one next week, which I might describe as my favorite psalm. Shh. we'll talk about it when we get there. But in any case, this is a lovely short psalm going to Jerusalem, being in Jerusalem, caring about Jerusalem. I think it's something we should appreciate at a time when there are many, many competing voices telling us what Jerusalem is, what it isn't, what it should be. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, may my right hand wither, may my right eye lose its, oh, reverse that. May my right eye wither, may my right hand lose its cunning. That's another song. All right. So glad to talk with you, and we'll see you next week.